Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and good morning, everyone. I know this is third day. I hope you are not feeling tired. After 3 days of intensive intellectual debate. If you're tired, I just came from a class. I have a class here at this university at 8:30 in global security. So let me start on this issue I was discussing with my student this morning in global security, because I feel some of the issues which will be discussed, it's related to security. In particular, after the collapse or the end of the Cold War, there is so many things happen in international relations, and one of these things is this concept of security. In the past, security was only related to military issues. But after the end of the Cold War, after 1990, security start or get a momentum into widening and deepening the concept of security. And I feel most of the topics we will be discussing this morning is relating to this deepening and widening the concept of security. Widening, it's not a military issue. It's not only istikhbarat and military and army. Economy is part of security. Health is part of security. Women issue become also part of security. So this is the widening of the concept of security, which we will be, our scholars will be discussing. But also the deepening of the concept of security, which also gained momentum after the end of the Cold War, in particular using the concept of a human security. Whom we should provide security. In the past, we are talking about the state. In realism, in IR, this is one of the major images in IR, and there is so many theories coming from there. They focus on the state. When they analyze anything, they focus on the state. But now, we start talking about human as an individual. This is where social constructivism and pluralism, liberalism came into debate. So I'm looking forward to the papers which will be presenting in socio-economic challenges to the Muslim. I'm not sure about the Ummah, because I think I have my reservation. I raise it in the first day, and I challenge myself and I challenge my colleagues when I said the Ummah is dead. I mean, it's not exist. And we need to work very hard to revive this concept of Ummah. So we will be looking at these issues, and we will start with Professor Ahmed Faruk Aysan from Şehir University, where he will be giving his paper on dealing with social justice. I'm trying to use diplomatic language here. Very social justice, poverty, and productivity in Muslim society. Please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you for this kind introduction, and thank you for Professor Samuel Eryan, especially for organizing such a wonderful event. I was here yesterday morning, and I greatly benefit from the talks. And I also remember 1990s when first this Istanbul municipality has been taken by the Welfare Party in 1990s. It was more of an intellectual endeavor also. It's not just about the municipality issue, but from all over the world, the intellectuals working on Islamic issues have been invited. And I remember all those days. Professor Richard Falk is here, Professor Şahit is here, many distinguished speakers. I had the chance to listen, Professor Esposito, Jonathan Brown, and all the speakers actually. So it is I'm very delighted to be here among these speakers actually. So that's why. And also, I also remember 1990s, probably we will have full of people attending this, even for single speaker. I am sure that there will be more attendees. So that also shows the changes in the Muslim world, I guess. But alhamdulillah, it is good to talk. And as yesterday Professor Ahmet Şahin said, we have to go back to the basics, and that basic is starting from the intellectual endeavor. Certain things failed in Islamic world, unfortunately, but we shouldn't be pessimistic, and we should start from the beginning, and the beginning is more of an intellectual endeavor. That's why I very much thank the organizers to bring all these distinguished speakers to here and organize such a wonderful conference. So among those conferences, actually, among the speakers, I will be relatively talking about less, probably important thing, but still it is more related with the economic side. I would like to say more optimistic things about the Muslim world on the economic side, but we know the situation. So in today's talk, I will be talking mostly about the current state of economics in the Muslim world. But I would like to be pointing out more optimistic opportunities, because I mean, again, when we go back to the basics, we have to be optimistic. Otherwise, we have to give up everything for the Muslim Ummah, for the world in general, also for the humanity. So I would like to point out some of the opportunities that might be benefited by the Muslim countries, especially, to develop themselves to have higher growth rates. And I would like to point out some optimistic clues as well in the Muslim world. Given that I have about 15 minutes to talk, I don't want to get into the many details of the economic indicators, but I would like to be more general, and I will especially emphasize the Islamicity index, which encompasses many of the development indicators that we need to talk about for the Muslim countries. So let me start. First of all, current state of economics. Why do we need to focus on these issues, social justice, poverty, productivity in Muslim world? Because of the current state of the economics, current state of the Muslim countries on those issues. Most of the Muslim majority countries are actually poor countries, unfortunately. Their GDP per capita for Muslim countries is about $10,000. But when we exclude the Islamic countries and non-OIC member countries, it's about $17,000, which is about 70–75% more income the rest of the countries are actually receiving. So Muslim majority countries are also lacking in many development indicators, in education, in health, in social justice, in many indicators. We all know this, so that's why I don't want to get into the details of each indicators, because this is very much done by the World Bank, by CIGA, even by Islamic Development Bank. So you all know these indicators, but I would like to focus more on Islamicity index, which encompasses all those indices anyway. So that's why stating the current outlook of the OIC countries, the Muslim countries, are important. But I would like to also provide some solutions or provide some opportunities that the Muslim countries might benefit from. So first of all, when we look at the OIC countries are comprised of Muslim countries, and they are OIC member countries are almost constituting all Muslim countries. And they are constituting about 25% of the world population. But when we come to how much they receive from the world output, it is with the current US dollar numbers, it's about 8.6%, let's say 9%. But I mean, they are constituting about 25% of the world population, but they are just receiving about 9% of the world income. Even we take this with the purchasing power parity, it is just 15%. So unfortunately, the Muslim world, Muslim countries are not producing enough, and they are not constituting a major part of the world output. In spite of that, OIC countries have more than 50 member countries, but when we get into the actual GDP figures, they are not producing enough. And the same thing, what might be the reason for that? One of the main reasons is the labor force participation rates. We have high unemployment rate, even among the educated young, and this is even the case for, even worse case, for the female labor force participation. So we are not engaging in production much. That's a good indicator, labor force participation. Also, when we look at the export figures again the same. I mean, the Muslim world has not been very much integrated in through the real economy, through the trade, to the rest of the world. Again, we face with the same number. The OIC countries are constituting about 10% of the overall world trade. And unfortunately, we will show in a bit that most of those trade is through natural resource export. And even among the OIC countries also, even among the Muslim countries, we are not trading among each other much, because you remember in 1990s, especially with this formation, idea of formation of the D8, Muslim countries will come together, they will trade more, they will produce more, they will enlarge the cake. But as we see, I mean, they are still, they are trading with the rest of the world, and most of their trade is with the rest of the world. Again, OIC member countries' trade is just about 10% of their overall trade. Okay, thank you. And this is hard to change, because most of the OIC countries are natural resources endowed countries, and they are mostly exporting natural resources. Even considering the new trade theories, mostly the trade is between the developed countries, we know. And this is, if the countries start producing similar goods, they even trade more. But in order to do so, they have to produce more manufacturing, more technology-added sort of products. But unfortunately, Muslim countries, majority of the Muslim countries are just natural resource exporter countries. We will see in a bit more in detail. For example, if you think about the top 10 OIC countries in terms of trade, as you see, they are running either trade surpluses or trade deficits. That also shows that these countries are different, and it is difficult for them to trade and to have a Eurozone sort of trade integration, because they are producing different items, and they need third parties for their export and imports. And the same thing, I mean, this is also interesting. If you look at the top 4 countries, for example, in terms of their exports, for example, Saudi Arabia is just exporting oil. Malaysia is exporting manufacturing products, but also they are also oil producing country. United Arab Emirates is just a trade transmission channel. Probably they are not even producing things, just a channel for exporting to third countries. Indonesia is a major, these are the, among the OIC countries, the share of each countries in trade. Indonesia is exporting about 11% of overall OIC trade, but they are also mostly a natural resource exporter country. Only Turkey actually really producing manufacturing goods, doesn't have much natural resources, and we are coming about 4th among the OIC countries. So Malaysia and Turkey is probably the only 2 countries really producing more manufacturing goods, and these are real production, others are just natural resource extraction anyway. And this is we can see the same figure in terms of the types of products. As you see here, major importing markets of the OIC countries are not among themselves, but among towards the third countries, mostly to developed countries, and most of those are again in natural resources. They are mostly exporting to developed countries or to China, to India, but they are mostly natural resources. In terms of the product, again, we see here that most of the export of the OIC countries are natural resources or mineral sort of products. So this is a problem. So it is quite difficult to have integration through trade. We cannot increase the size of the pie by just focusing on the real side of the economy and expect that people will, or the OIC member countries, the Muslim countries will benefit by trading more or producing and making FDIs in different Islamic countries. So we should start from somewhere else. My point is that we can start from the finance side, because in the literature, first the real sides of the economy, for example, FDI comes or the production comes, and then the finance comes, or there are some papers showing that the first finance companies, banks, go and invest in other countries, and then real economy follows. The real economic production takes place afterwards because of the acceleration of the process through the banking. So as you see, it is quite difficult to just rely on the real side and to trade and to expect that the Islamic countries will start producing more by investing and establishing new factories. But I consider that Islamic finance might be a channel for this integration. So definitely, I will show in a bit that I would like to be more optimistic. I will show in the opportunity part that instead of trade, we can start from the finance side and we can help the Islamic countries or the Muslim countries to integrate even at this among each other, and then also towards the third parties on treaties. So we have many challenges for sure, and we have also opportunities. We have to point out the opportunities. We cannot just pose the challenges. What are the main challenges? Mostly Islamic countries are poor. Even this figure is quite interesting. 31% of the total population of OIC countries are actually below poverty line. So this is a huge figure. So to summarize all this, actually, I would like to put the Islamicity index. Islamicity index has been developed about 5-6 years ago by Askeri and et al., by Zamir Iqbal also. He used to be here at the World Bank. There are 4 main dimensions of this Islamicity index: economic Islamicity, legal and governance, and human and political rights, and international relations Islamicity. There are many data on considering the development indicators, and we can touch on all those data, but it will take time and it's quite complicated because some of the data might be contradicting among each other. So that's why it's good to aggregate all of them. So that's what they have done actually. They bring all sorts of data related with these sub-indicators, and then they come up with a simple index. So that's why we can summarize all these development indicators with this simple index. And for example, what is the economic Islamicity index? It comprises many sub-data. So let me get into the results because I have quite a limited time. What is interesting here is that if we just look at the economic Islamicity index, because the idea is here, as it is pointed out by Mehmet Çaha yesterday, it is not just about the discourses. I mean, Islam is always good. When I first read this article, actually, by Askeri and others, I said that this is not about Islam. This is, I mean, Islam is always good, but later I thought that, I first criticized the paper, but later I thought that if we really abide with Islamic rules, this should be the outcome. So this is more outcome-based sort of indices. So it's not just about the discourse, it's not just about the name, but it is actually what we are doing. Are we less corrupt? Are we more abiding with the rules? Are we more developed in economy in this? So this is what Islam asks us to do anyway. So it is more about the deeds rather than the discourses. So the interesting thing is that among the first 20 countries, there is no single Muslim country. Among the last 20 countries, unfortunately, it's full of Islamic countries. Among the first 20 Muslim countries, as you see, the first one comes with a 36, it is United Arab Emirates, because it's a more liberal, more integrated market probably. That's why they come with the 36 number in economic index. So among the other indices, for example, among those challenges also, in the case of legal and governance indices, there are many data collected by various sources. They are all included, and again, the picture doesn't change much. Among the first 20 countries, at least Qatar is there. It's a relatively small country, but Qatar comes as a 15th. At least we have one among the first 20. Again, among the last 20, there are many Muslim countries. When we come to the indicators of human and political rights indices, again, there are many data composed, and when we have the single data through aggregation, through principal component and so on, they bring all those data together. And again, we don't have any single country, Muslim country, among the first 20, but again, in the last 20, we have almost all of them are Muslim countries. And here, again, Muslim countries are ranked very low. Among the indicators of international relations is in Islamicity index, again, we are not that good. We don't have any country in the first 20. Again, the last 20 is full of with the Muslim countries. So as you see, we have many challenges. We have many challenges in terms of following the sustainable indices put forward by the United Nations. We are also lagging behind on that. But I would like to come to the opportunities. I don't want to live with a pessimistic note. We have to be hopeful and we have to start from somewhere. As I show you, I mean, I believe that economic integration will help all the countries. There's a positive externality probably spreading from Turkey. If Turkey is producing more manufacturing goods integrated with the rest of the world, inshallah it will spread over the other Muslim countries. So this is a good sign. And one of the basic things that we can start with might be the Islamic finance. As you see, Islamic finance is increasing the share in Muslim countries, also in the global financial markets. In their GDP figures, in the total bank assets, it's also increasing. So, and this Islamic finance is mostly among the OIC countries. If there is one bank, for example, Al-Baraka Turk is not just located in Turkey, it is located in Malaysia, located in Bahrain, located in North Africa and all places. So this sort of financial integration sooner or later might lead to real integration in trade, real integration in investment, in real integration in FDI. So this might be one channel we might need to benefit more from. And we have to also benefit more from our Zakat, Waqf, social institutions to reach to the sustainable development goals also. So we have also opportunities. Some countries have also realize this. That's why they have some national visions. They want to plan, and they can plan their cases to integrate with the rest of the world and to grow faster. And this, at least to have national plans, are good to reach those sort of targets. So my overall conclusion is actually that we are relatively poor to the rest of the world, but we have to really abide with the Islamic rules, and we have to go with the deeds rather than just discourses. And for that, institutions are very much important. Institutions, like pointed out by Acemoğlu and al. Sometimes we discuss about the symptoms, macroeconomic symptoms of the problem. We have current account deficit, we have low education level. We discuss this sort of things. But the more important of that, we have institutional weaknesses. If we solve the institutional weaknesses, if we invest in establishing better institutions, we are more likely to solve our economic problems, we are more likely to develop our development indicators, and we are more likely to be better Muslims in terms of increasing our ranks in Islamicity indices. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ahmed, for giving this good audience the reality of the national state in the Muslim country. He finished with, in his conclusion, poor. And I think this is something should alert politicians and scholars who are working to develop and to revive the Muslim Ummah. We have the topic on globalization and economic development on the Islamic world by Professor Dr. Mehmet Bulut, Director of Istanbul Sabahattin Zaim University.
Good morning, everybody. After Ahmet's relatively pessimistic presentation, I would like to be more optimistic in my presentation. From the past to the future, in the beginning, I would like to stress that the population is a very critical issue in the economic development. You know, we have 4 main sources for economic driving. It's resources, natural resources, population, technology and capital, you know, and then institutions governing. All these 4 driving forces during the globalization time in recent 2 centuries, the Islamic world unfortunately has lost. And if you like, I would like to say they had to fight with evils rather than the production. They forgot, their governance institutions. They forgot they are losing their populations. Natural resources are, what is happening nowadays still in the Middle East. And so technology and capital is another, very critical issue. And on, the new economic system of the Westerners, by using the interest, it's more competitive. We know it. So that means, as yesterday I tried to, stress a new system in the world. After appearing this new system from the early modern times, the Muslim countries faced with so many, disadvantages. But the most important thing is what we faced in recent century, in last century, in 20th century, we lost our energy to fight for independence. Except 3 countries, Turkey, Iran, and Afghanistan, all Islamic world were under the occupation, and they had to fight until 1970s for independence. So the comparison of Ahmet's is okay, it's reality. But we have to look at, the game, how it's going on in a long time. So now I am coming to what, before that I would like to again stress on this time. For most economic historians, the great divergence started from the beginning of 16th century. But recent research, like Kenneth Pomeranz, he wrote a book on great divergence in between Western Europe and China, and he came to conclusion that in 1830s or 40s, China was still richer than UK. This is the Kenneth Pomeranz conclusion. It's new research from California School. Now he is in Chicago. So, a new research, I am sure if we could realize it the same model and compare with most part of the Western world, maybe the industrialized cities like Tokat, Bursa, and Kocaeli or Istanbul, compared to the Western industrial cities like London, Amsterdam, or another, this part can be richer by his model. So, but we need to make more research. What I am trying to say, this divergence appeared in 150 years, in recent one age and after the middle of 19th century, or in 20th century. The big challenge appeared at this time. So now, you see, this is Africa, this is Asia, and this is Western Europe, you see, and this is Western offshores. So, from 17th century, it's very clear, according to this figure, the Western world became, more developed and richer than the rest of the world, than the Asia. And what happened then? See, again, this is the countries in the West, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, India, and China. Now, we will see in this figure, from 1980s in 20th century, the picture started to change, and Asia started to rise and started to develop faster than the West after 1980s. So now we are in a new situation. I am optimistic for the Islamic world also in the future. So after this time, you see, in 1990s, we will see now Asia is coming, very fast. And the West is declining, or comparatively declining. So, and this is world GDP share, now is economic growth, and look, this is North America, this is Western Europe, and this is Asia, and this is Africa and Middle East. You see that they are growing. East, Islamic world, and Africa is growing more than Western Europe and North America. And it will continue in the future. So what happened in recent years? Look, India, this is for purchasing power parity growth. India is the first in between 2012 and 2017. China is the second, and Turkey as Islamic country is the third one. And then UK is coming, United States, Germany, Japan. So that means our future is the bright as Islamic world. And I am coming now, you know, this is by country. You will see again here, Turkey is growing in between 4 and 5. And a new economic, you know, plan for the future of the following years, it will be about 5. And you see Pakistan is growing, Egypt is growing. So this world is growing faster than the Western world, and it will going. So now, another important picture. We are now in 2017, this is 16. China is producing 18% of the world GDP. But in 2050, it will increase more than 25%. So this is United States, it's declining. This is Eurozone, European Union. It's declining their share from 15 till 9. And India is increasing also. So it's very clear, you know, Asia was producing in the world in last millennium more than the West. And human history, from the beginning of civilizations, Asia and Middle East were more productive than the West. The West in human history, just in this time, was higher productive than this region, Asia and, you know, Freestyle Crescent. Very, you know, in human history, it's very small. And now, again, what's happening? Asia and Middle East, of course, is increasing, and the West is declining. So, in recent 200 years, in 2 ages, the theory was the rise of the West and decline of the rest. It was, you know, all social scientists know. But now is the rising of the East and declining of the West. This is just for economy. This is economic analysis. So go ahead, and Africa is also coming. Africa is coming. So now we have emerging markets and we have developing countries, GA and EA. Who is in GA? United States, UK, France, Germany, Japan, Canada, and Italy. In emerging 7, we have China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, Russia, Mexico, and Turkey. We have 2 Islamic countries here. They are very critical in the future, Indonesia and Turkey. But after them, we have 3 or 4 very important critical Muslim countries. Nigeria in Africa, Nigeria, Tanzania, and Egypt. And in Asia, we have Pakistan. So these countries have huge population. And I will come to my conclusion. What is the critical for the future of Islamic Ummah? It will be, R&D and education, making investment to technology and industry. I will come to that. But now, look at this. What I am trying to say, in 1995, emerging, comparing to G7, E7 was just half size in production. In 2015, they are about same size in their share in world GDP. But in 2030, E7 is doubled comparing to G7. Maybe earlier in 2030, it will be done. In purchasing power parity, maybe earlier. So that means now, what is my suggestion? For, this is Silk Road. I published a book on Silk Road. Silk Road. Silk Road was, the economic development of the Asian civilizations and the sharing, all the sources of the world. Not just economic and also cultural, social, all values were exchanged in between the East and West. For a long time, it was starting from, China till Europe. And now, we have to focus on a Silk Road. And we have to, establish a new cooperation, a new paradigm in the relations in between the East and West. So what I am trying to say, not just trade, but also energy, exchanging ideas, exchanging goods, exchanging all sources that we have as human beings, we need to, share and exchange. If we could realize a good cooperation and collaboration in between first Muslim countries and then the other countries in the East and West, like yesterday we were discussed here, Russia, China, India, for Muslim countries is another option to improve their relations, not just, economically, but also politically, for stable, for balance of power in the region and in the world. That would be great for, for the future of Islamic Ummah and also for all of the world. We can reach to a better world we can reach to a real peace and real production, and we, as the Muslims, the population of Muslims, we will not fight with the evils with each other, but we will produce. We will start to produce, a new paradigm, a new ideas, a new, technologies and everything. So this Silk Road is very important. This is my believing. We have to do something. So now I am coming to the population. You see, this is the most, the Muslim population centered in this part of the world, and there is China in the top, and then India population size. So let's come to the future of population size. Population is a critical issue for the economic historians. In long term, the game is depend on population. Don't forget, population is critical. More important than capital, than money, than all kind of sources. If you have educated people, and if you have, strong and population, then don't forget about the future. So now you will see here Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Egypt, Iran, Turkey. These are, the Muslim countries. More India. In India, India is the biggest country in Islamic world, as a huge population, more than Indonesia. So I am coming now. So there is, you know, a big difference in between the Muslim countries. Qatar, Kuwait, Brunei, these are very rich countries as GDP per capita comparing to the West. So, but now Turkey is, this is about purchasing power parity, GDP per capita. So these are, you know, economically better than the other Islamic Muslim countries, and they will increase their capacity, I am sure. And this is the top in GDP among Islamic countries: Indonesia, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Islamic Republic of Iran, Nigeria, Pakistan, Malaysia, and Bangladesh. So what is our capacity and what we can do more in addition to cooperation among us? We have to use Islamic economics potential. It's not just finance like Ahmet mentioned before. Islamic finance is important, but also there are some other industries, halal food, travel, fashion, and it's more than this. Economic cooperation, sharing of the economic values, economic sources, sharing of the life is the main aim in Islamic economics. Not just among the Muslims, but with all of the world, with all you know, the nations and the human beings in the world. So I am finishing. So this, we have so many, and we have strong heritage from our Islamic civilizations. Background is very useful, very strong, but we have to cover it. How can we improve some new economic models for our empowering the population, our countries? I made some competitions, but it doesn't matter. So RD education, technology, partnership, and cooperation, I mentioned about them. And in some, I suggest first for Muslim countries and then for rest of the world, for all of the world, to, you know, economics is just not, you know, to focus on profit. It's more than profit. Share everything. Ecology is critical for us. Culture is important. Politics, that means to, you know, to participate as all human beings, women, you know, young generation, and all parts of the society to the game is very important. So we are suggesting as Muslim scholars a new paradigm for economic development, for the future of the world, not just focus as homo economicus to our own profit and to our own interest. So if we, you know, can encourage the other scholars of the part of the world, of course I know in the West we have so many, you know, strong teams, and they, we agree with them on this issue. We have to encourage our nations and our governments to share all the sources and to prepare a new paradigm in economy. Then we can easily solve Beitul Maqdis problem, Syrian problem, Arakan problem, and Iraqi problem, if we can persuade them to come to this picture. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Bulut. Very interesting. I think the two papers complement each other. This is a more positive, and I think it gives us another reality and also about the future. And I think this is giving me a little bit of hope. Change me from 2 days ago to today. I think this is giving me a little bit of hope that we can intellectually. I think this is very impressive paper. Thank you, Professor Bulut, for this paper. Thank you. Now we are moving to another important topic this morning, which is regarding women, the silent voices, and the youth. And I can see in this hall a lot of youth, including myself. So we will have two papers on this, on the challenges of empowerment of women and youth in Muslim society. And first of all, we start with Professor Ömer Çaha, who is the chair of the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Istanbul Sabahattin Zaim University.
Thank you very much. Okay, so two very opposite presentations. I'm sorry to be inside of Ahmet on the issue of women, which is perhaps even more pessimistic than Ahmet's presentation. So hoping that nothing will happen to me, since Professor Bulut is my rector. Anyway, so what is the problem? First of all, we should understand the problem. Actually, you know, we are living in a modern society, and women, Muslim women, are facing challenges, problems associated with the modern society itself, but having traditional values. So when we look at the traditional society, the basic three important issues of the traditional societies are the domestic life, the distinction between domestic life and public life, traditional roles of women and men, a very clear distinction between the traditional roles of men and women, and accumulation of power in the hand of very limited group, which were, of course, mostly men. So when we come to the modern society, the three important things that we see in the modern society related to our issue is the sharing of power, the sharing of sovereignty, which was accumulated in the hand of a limited group of men, a single man of a group or a group of men in the traditional society, whether in the Western society or in Eastern societies, in Muslim societies. And the second thing happened with modern society is equality. In particular, the gender equality is very important. So the most basic feature of modernity, of modern society indeed, is equality. Equality between different classes, and equality, the gender equality between men and women. And another point may be the abolishment of the borders between public, social life, and domestic, the familial life. This is also the things happen with the industrial society or with modern society, whatever you call. Okay, so when we look at how Western women have achieved, of course it can be discussed whether they achieved or not, but at least in respect to some points, in respect to their participation in economy, their participation in education, in politics, they have achieved indeed. This is the reality, you know. So I think two important challenges at the beginning of modernity they faced. One was somehow man-based political theory. Don't forget that. The political theory, the modern political theory, developed by Hegel, masters of political thought like Hegel, you know, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, was quite masculine indeed, you know. And they reconstructed, developed, you know, and they reconstruct the state, the idea of state over the nature of man. According to Hegel, the public sphere, the society, the state, they are, you know, associated with the nature of man, which is rational. And the nature of women, indeed, cannot be able to take part, actually, to make women to take part in the social life, you know. So the second challenge they faced was the reaction of church, in particular in the case of France, you know. There is a very fiery struggle against the attempt of women to take part in the public life and the reaction of church, because church indeed did not welcome their participation in political and economic life. So the Third Republic, which was established and declared in 1870, indeed, the main issue of the Third Republic in France was the education of women. Whether women, you know, continue to be educated by the church or in the public schools by the state. So don't forget that, you know, the education, the right of education in France was given about 46 years later than the Ottoman women. The Ottoman women received the right of education in public school in 1842, but the French women in 1888, you know, because of the reaction of church. So it was not so easy. We know the story, you know, what happened to the suffrage movements, you know, in England, in the rest of Europe in particular. So we should remember what happened in Europe. Indeed, was not because of the intellectual revolution in Europe. You know, the story behind the success of European women indeed is not longer than 100 years. The first right of vote was given to the women in Western society was in Finland, and it was in 1906. You know, before 1906, the women were not politically equal, as they were not, you know, legally equal as well in most of the Western societies, in most of the European societies in particular. So we can say that, you know, what happened in favor of women, indeed, was, you know, de facto situation developed by new economy, new economical dynamics in Europe. You know, thanks to capitalism indeed, you know. I don't say capitalism, free market economy or industrial economy, which brought a new dynamics, opportunities for women to participate in economy, in labor force. And thus, you know, as the result, taking part in education and in politics and the rest of life. So the doctrine of human rights also, which emphasized on inevitable and irreversible natural rights, which were equality and freedom, the basic, you know, equality and freedom, ranging from the glorious declaration, the Bill of Declaration of Human Rights in Britain, and then, you know, following in Virginia, Declaration of Human Rights and the Human and Civil Declaration of Human Rights in France, and also the allocation of power, which is democracy. They are all, you know, channels and mediums which created a new ground for the Western woman to get in public life. So I would like to share some pictures here. When we look at the rate of women in parliaments, in regard to the parliaments, the rate of women in the parliaments, as you see, the Arab states and the Muslim states, actually, they have less, you know, share of women in parliaments. So the percentage of women over than 40% in parliaments, actually in the world parliaments now, by the January 2017, there are 12 countries. Just one Senegal, one is Muslim, and the rest, actually 2 or 3 are European, and the rest are non-European countries. And when we look at the picture of Europe, they are mostly, you know, the rate of women is changing between 30 and 40%. When we look at the picture of some MENA countries, as you see, the highest amount is seen in Algeria and Tunisia. It is interesting here about Turkey. As you see, the rate of women in Turkish parliament now is about 14.9, and it was under 4.5 until 2007. So thanks to the existing parties, and in particular to the ruling party, you know, doing very important regulations for facilitating the participation of women in diverse, you know, aspect of social life. So when we look at the labor force, In respect to the labor force, we have indeed also very negative picture in Muslim countries. This is the regional distribution. So when we look at here the Middle East and North African countries, the MENA countries, and the rest of Arabic countries, they have the less indeed performance here. The world average in respect to the female participation in labor force is about 49, but what we see in the Middle East and North Africa is about 22. It's quite, negative picture, unfortunately. So when we look at some of the MENA countries, as you see, depending on economic development indeed, or the gross nation product, allocation of gross nation production, actually, women start to have more opportunity to participate. And here, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, the Gulf states, have better performance. Okay, so when we look at education, in education we have some, relatively more positive picture, but still there is a fundamental gap between male and female in education in some countries. Morocco, Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Iraq, they have quite, problematic picture here. Okay, so what are the major problems seen in Muslim societies? The barriers existing against women to participate in labor force, in education, in politics. These are very important, and serial, actually fundamental problems. And the less opportunities to women to access the mosque, marriage at early age, discrimination against women in all aspects of life, business, public offices, etc., and less opportunities to have property. There are major problems actually we see in Muslim societies. And what are the reasons behind? Some of the reasons indeed are the result at the same time. Patriarchal values is very prevalent in Muslim societies that justify the domination of men over women. Gender distinction of public and private spheres is another reason. Authoritarian political regimes which are close to participation of their citizens, indeed. This is the reality of most of Muslim societies, unfortunately. Less developed economies, educational gap between men and women, socialization of women over traditional values, the double roles that women have in their career, in their professional life. This is, of course, indeed, this is not particular to Muslim women, Muslim societies only, but it is a universal reality, what we call glass ceiling, when the women are mobilizing into the higher position. It is estimated that there is an invisible barrier, which is called ceiling, So this is very common in Muslim societies as well. I just have accomplished a research, in 3 sectors, finance, education, and health sectors in Turkey. The percentage of women working in these 3 sectors are more than 50%. Changing between 55 and 57. But the rate of women in managerial positions is about 10% or something. Okay, so the lack of absence of role models, the presidents, the absence of presidents, deputies, the female, in higher officers, etc., and the control of state over women's body. This is a different story, and this is a very fundamental story, but I have not enough time to go in more detail, in particular in the case of Turkey. For a very long time, the state actually, gave a very strong reaction to the participation of women with their hands in public sphere. As we see the same, in oppositional way in Iran, that state controlled the dress, the hijab, and the body of women from a different perspective. Okay, so when we look at the reaction of women, actually in Muslim societies, we have two reactions from the women. One from secular feminist groups, and the other one from the religious Islamic women's groups. What we see from the secular groups, they criticize the patriarchal culture, they criticize the patriarchal family, what is personal is political. And they, try to expose the familiar relations, and to redefine and, re-regulate the roles within the family. And they demand the inclusion of women in decision-making processes, and they emphasize on the control of women. Our body is ours, no control by anybody else, neither by state nor by male. And demanding equal opportunities of women in all aspects of life, developing and disseminating women's perspective, which is important in cinema, in academia, in media, etc., and struggling against violence in any way against women. So when we look at the reaction of Islamic women, we basically see two reactions. One is what we call traditional, accepting that the basic role of women is traditional, housewife, childcare, motherhood, etc., and the women, unless it is necessary, they shouldn't go in public sphere and they shouldn't take part in labor force, etc., etc. This is traditional. But the other one is what is called critical and feminist, in particular being under the impact of feminism. They are very critical on this issue, and they are actually, some of them are called Islamic feminism, developed in North Africa, in Iran, and even in Turkey. There are some representative of this approach. What is the basic discourses? They struggle to take part in the public life. Actually, they have two messages. One message to the Muslim man, arguing that whatever in the name of Islam, they are not Islam in it. They are traditional. And Islam in the history has been interpreted, Islamic texts like Quran and Hadith of Prophet. And what we know in the name of Islamic law, they have been, reproduced and interpreted within the culture, within the patriarchal cultural framework. Okay? So what we know in the name of Islam, mostly indeed are not Islam. Because in the very nature of Quran and Islam is equity and equality. And in front of God, in front of Allah, there is no distinction between the nature of man and that of woman. And there is no reason to believe that Islam brings the domination of man over woman. Okay, I'm finishing. And the last message they have is to the Western women and Western, to the essentialist understanding of women, that there is no single way of emancipation, of liberation for women. A Muslim woman can, attain her liberation even, through by means of her dress, her traditional values even, So, how to empower women in Muslim society, just a couple of words and I'm finishing. Okay, giving opportunity in education. Education indeed is very important because there are so many investigations that education, the more educated women are more likely to develop their self-realization, to participate, to express themselves, to have, less child mortality, to have less fertility, and many things like this. So education indeed is very important for empowering of Muslim women. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ömer, for your presentation. Before I introduce the last, not the least, speaker, I have to thank Professor Sami that he include a Muslim voice. Include a woman voice in this presentation to address some of the critique Professor Ömer just mentioned. So I think this is well organized to have a woman voice on a woman issue here. So we will have Professor Asma Afsaruddin from Indiana University. Please.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here, and I want to begin by first thanking Professor Sami Al-Aryan for organizing this conference and for including me in this event. And I want to thank Dr. Mehmet Bulut, the president of the university, and his staff for their gracious hospitality. I'm afraid Professor Çaha has actually addressed many of the points that I'm going to be referring to, but much more briefly. So I'm actually very grateful to you for your detailed presentation. And I think I will elaborate on some of the points you made and maybe disagree with you slightly on some of the nuances of the points, the larger points that you raise. It is often assumed that notions of political agency and citizenship, particularly when applied to women, was born only in the 20th century, and this is certainly a predominant idea in the West. But a number of scholars who have delved into the history of early Islam have argued instead that women's political agency and citizenship may be understood to have existed from the very inception of Islamic society. When the Muslim polity was established in Medina by the Prophet Muhammad in 622 CE, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, women's citizenship in the polity was formally recognized through the process known as bay'ah, or the proffering of allegiance. Both men and women emigrating from Mecca to Medina had to take a special public oath to indicate their formal induction into the Prophet's community and affirm their loyalty to it. A number of these women came on their own, leaving behind families and oppressive social circumstances to seek spiritual fulfillment in the new Muslim community. They found the Quranic message of the complete equality of men and women before God and the recognition of their independent moral and social agency highly empowering. Muslim feminists today consider the bay'ah to represent the political enfranchisement and social empowerment of Muslim women from the very beginning of Islamic history. Women, in fact, remained visible and active in the public sphere at least through the first 2 centuries of Islam, taking their cue from the women companions of the Prophet. But as we heard from the previous speaker, things did begin to change after the 2nd century of Islam, and these developments were not always very favorable to women, resulting in the rather bleak situation that we heard described. But throughout the pre-modern period, wealthy elite women in particular continued to exercise considerable social clout through charitable activities and the endowment of public institutions such as madrasas, libraries, and hospitals. This was a natural consequence of their ability to inherit and freely dispose of their wealth. Religious scholarship was also a field in which women's contributions were noteworthy, although largely unheralded today. Women's empowerment was therefore a basic and striking feature of the early Ummah, an important point for us to remember as we move forward. To now turn to the topic of women's modern political and social activism. In the modern period, organized women's movements began to develop in the Arab world, notably in Egypt, around 1919. These movements were tied to women's nationalist activities, seeking liberation from European colonizers. Women, like men, began demonstrating in the streets against British colonialism and struggled for independence. Women's explicit political activities of this nature were encouraged by men in the service of the nation, although gender activism, which was an inevitable outgrowth of nationalism, was regarded with quite a bit of suspicion. Huda Sha'arawi, an upper-class Cairene woman from a prominent family, established the Egyptian Women's Union in the 1920s and was instrumental in obtaining the vote for women in Egypt. Since the 1970s, there has been a resurgence of women's movements in a number of Muslim-majority countries, fueled to some extent by the United Nations Decade of Women, which was between 1975 and 85. More recently, a distinctive feature of the pro-democracy movements in the Middle East, known as the Arab Spring, that swept through a large swath of the Arab world, was the significant participation of women and young people in them. Whether they were protesting, organizing, providing humanitarian services, ensuring food delivery in blankets, blogging, hunger striking, and indeed dying for the cause, women in particular assumed a central role in the Arab Spring. In Tunisia, where it all began, women were visible in the massive demonstrations of early to mid-January in the country's Jasmine Revolution in 2011. In Egypt, at least 20% of the crowds that flocked to Tahrir Square in Cairo during the first week of the uprising were made up of women. In Syria, Libya, and Yemen, women took part in protest movements to campaign for democracy. The socioeconomic causes that led to the Arab Spring have clearly not disappeared and have worsened in recent years, affecting women and youth in particular. Among such causes are high rates of unemployment for the educated classes, neoliberal policies of privatization and union busting, corruption in high places, soaring food and energy prices, economic hardship caused by the shrinking of employment opportunities in the Gulf oil states and Europe, particularly on account of the 2008 global financial meltdown, and decades of frustration with authoritarian styles of governance. In their roles as workers and professionals, as well as family caregivers, women have suffered directly as a consequence of these problems. Young adults have also suffered on account of large-scale unemployment and diminished opportunities for socioeconomic advancement. Education and residence in urban areas, however, are factors in mitigating these circumstances. In Tunisia, women have a relatively high literacy rate, over 80%, as we recently heard, and that's also generally true for North Africa, and represent more than 1/5 of the country's wage earners and make up about 45% of the nearly 500,000 members of 18 local unions. Most of these unionized women work in the education, textile, health, city services, and tourism industries. Unlike in Tunisia, only about a quarter of Yemeni women can read and write. Only 17% have finished high school, and only 5% are wage earners, though most work hard all their lives, mostly on farms. However, in urban areas such as Aden or Sana'a, middle and upper middle class women have an important place in the professions and business, or as school teachers, and more than a quarter of college students are women. Many of these women have been among the pro-democracy leaders. These trends hold for other parts of the Islamic world as well. Educated women and youth in urban areas have better chances for employment and are consequently more empowered to undertake social and political reform in such societies. Looking to the future, what can we say about ways to continue to empower women? And again, the previous speaker, of course, outlined quite a few important measures that have to be undertaken, and I'm going to just focus on a few of those. In general, women and young people in the 21st century have benefited from this generation's advances in education and the professions, and by the rise of the internet and social media. Women can assert leadership roles in cyberspace that they often cannot in competition with men in the city square and other concrete public spheres. These developments have also empowered young people who similarly benefit from increased access to education and to the internet and social media. Moving forward, first and foremost, education of women must remain the highest priority. It is a basic truth that human empowerment occurs through education. This is a fundamental value within the Islamic tradition, and its importance cannot be overestimated. As we all know very well, both women and men are obligated in Islam to acquire knowledge to allow for their full flourishing as human beings. Education is directly correlated with the ability of women to find employment and better their lives, especially in the case of dire economic necessity. It also empowers them to address issues of basic inequities and disenfranchisement in the public arena. Educational opportunities, therefore, have to be particularly extended to women in less developed rural areas. And both governmental and non-governmental agencies will have to play key roles in helping to disseminate education to broader groups of people in general, but to women in particular in Muslim-majority societies. There should furthermore be public validation and support for women's traditional roles as mothers and wives. And I should point out that Muslim feminists are equally supportive of such traditional roles, even as they argue and fight for increased access to the public sphere, and I don't think they are mutually exclusive. Attention should be paid to the establishment of easily accessible and affordable daycare centers, to the provision of better health services, maternity care, and generous maternity leaves. For Muslim-majority societies, the family remains the basic and the strongest unit within them. Recognition of the importance of the various roles that women play in their complex lives is a first essential step toward improving the situation of women in a number of these societies. The general consciousness of Muslim publics must be raised so that Muslim-majority societies embrace these notions of women's empowerment wholeheartedly and are made to realize the contributions of women through time. Samana Siddiqui from the Sound Vision Foundation suggested that accounts of Muslim women's contributions, both from the past and the contemporary world, for example, be included in Friday public sermons. She says, and I'm quoting from her now, Friday sermons are an indispensable tool for mass Islamic education. They offer the best platform to address the community as a whole on not just women's rights, but generally how women are the fabric of a solid Muslim community, end of quote. Women should also be well represented in the mosques or Islamic centers' administrative leadership. Siddiqui insists that women should be included in critical decision-making bodies because their input, as part, I'm going to pick up my speed here, because their input is part of the kind of consultative administrative style or shura that directly affects the well-being of the overall Muslim community. If offered resistance, she recommends that one should invoke the example of the Prophet, who welcomed women into the mosque in Medina and included them in various arenas of critical decision-making. Such prophetic examples are meant to create a powerful mandate for women's inclusion in various spheres of society. And finally, issues of domestic violence and family abuse should be addressed head-on. Domestic violence is, of course, completely antithetical to fundamental Islamic values that are meant to promote domestic harmony and stability. Nevertheless, such abuses do occur and need to be tackled urgently. And women need to be provided with critical information about how to address such issues, especially when young children are involved. And women's shelters must be created where they can take refuge, and the state must be proactive in taking such critical measures to combat such situations. Now, on to the issue of the empowerment of youth. With regard to youth, the first problem is a demographic one. The Muslim world is experiencing a youth bulge. In 2010, people under 30 comprised about 60% of the population in Muslim-majority countries. A younger population means a bigger labor force for which higher investment in capital is needed. But left untapped, it can become a destabilizing force. In 2010, youth unemployment in the Middle East was 25% and North Africa 24%. Such levels should give concern. When young people lack opportunity, they grow restless, dependency robs them of their dignity. Without an economic stake in society, they can lose their sense of belonging, and that can spill over into hostility to the state. From 1970 to 2000, 8 out of 10 countries experiencing new civil conflict had populations in which 60% were under 30. Access to education is improving in a number of Muslim-majority countries, but many young people still find that their qualifications do not match the opportunities available. So there must be a focus on vocational and technical training. 23% of the world's population is Muslim, but the 57 members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation conduct just about 8.5% of global trade, as we heard from the first speaker. Another overriding concern is the potential vulnerability of Muslim youth to the blandishments of those who wish to recruit them into the ranks of extremist militant groups. And here the importance of a religious education cannot be overemphasized, so that young people are brought up to be secure in their knowledge of mainstream Islamic beliefs and practices. The inculcation of religious values has to play a prominent role in providing direction and meaning to young people's lives and immunizing them against the possible lure of militancy. Well, to conclude then, education that inculcates religious and humanistic values and provides practical skills must remain the highest priority for women and youth in Muslim-majority societies today, as it is for men, of course, as well. Education is, after all, a fundamental Islamic value, and it is the gateway to realizing one's true potential as a human being, in which we need to invest our resources, time, and energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Asma, for your presentation. We have about half an hour, a good half an hour for discussion. I was trying my best to keep the speaker on their time. It's not easy, I can assure you. It's not easy, but I tried so we can have more time for discussion. However, before I open the floor for discussion, allow me to pick a theme from this presentation and also from day one and second do of the presentation. It was coming very clearly with Professor Akif in his remark in first day, and also it came with Professor Bulut with his presentation, and yesterday came with Professor Richard Falk very clearly, which is, to me, this is I'm very interested in this issue. This is why when I was listening to them, I thought, okay, I will use my power as a chair to pick this together before I open it for discussion, which is what Professor Falk mentioned, the colonialization of the mind and the decolonialization of the mind. And I feel if the Muslims would like to revive the Ummah, this is a must. This is a prerequisite before any steps moving to revive the Muslim Ummah. There is a need to decolonize the mind and the brain of the Muslims, because unfortunately Muslims has been not only military occupied in the last 100 years, but they have been under intellectual occupation. And as a result, when we, as a Muslim scholar, when we think, we don't think among the Muslim paradigms or the Muslims' discourse, we are thinking among the, how to put it, among the Western paradigm and the Western images and theories. And this is one of the crucial problem one of the real problem if we would like to revive this ummah. I know that it's not an easy job. In my field, I'm a theorist in international relations. There is so many theory in political science, but there is no Muslim contribution into IR theory. There is some attempt which has been done in the past, but it was not completed. And for example, we know in IR we have realism, we have pluralism, we have globalism, we have constructivism, we have feminism, we have all these images, but we don't have a Muslim image in international relation where we can use it to analyze what is happening in this part of the world. When we try to analyze anything happening in this part of the world, we borrow something coming from realism, pluralism, etc. And this is what I mean, or maybe this is what Professor Falk meant by decolonialization of the Muslim mind. I know this is not easy, and I will throw a final remark here, which is related. We have, allow me to use this phrase, we have a divorce between Islamic studies and social sciences. We have a huge divorce. طلاق بالثلاثين. It's not only بالثلاثة. No, it's بالثلاثين. There is no way I can see. I have raised this 15 years ago at Qatar University in a public lecture. And I said there is a big divorce between Islamic studies and social sciences. And there is a lot of divorce between historian and social sciences. Although my field in international relation was in the founding father, he's a historian. So I think we need scholars. And I would use this opportunity for this New Good Center and also for this conference. If we need to revive the Muslim Ummah, we need to decolonize the Muslim mind. And I think this is a must. I was nearly to talk about what Professor Bulut mentioned about the future, and I'm hoping, I think some of his statistic is giving us a huge hope. Also coincide with what Professor Falk mentioned about the geopolitics of the Middle East, the future of the geopolitics coming in the Middle East. We don't have Muslim geopolitical theory. And I'm using also this opportunity to call upon my department and also on other Turkish universities that geopolitical course must be a course for all students to study. If we would like to take the prediction of both Professor Falk and Professor Bulut here, that the future is coming geopolitically from this part of the world. If we need to address to our Turkish student their local need and their international need. I'm sorry if I have taken 5 minutes out from this, but we still have 25 good minutes for discussion. You don't need to throw a question. You can make a comments because I think this is very useful. We can take 3 together. Oh, we have so many hands. We have so many hands. Okay, I will start with the young generation using what happened yesterday. 1, 2, 3. Please.
Can you say it again?
1, 2, and 3.
Okay, so my question is to Dr. Mehmet and Dr. Ahmed. I wanted to understand really what is the concept of development itself from an Islamic perspective, because in the title it was mentioned economic development and notions of growth and all of the conventional indicators that are used in Western economic development thought were used in the presentations. So, and this is said in light of what Dr. Tariq Ramadan was mentioning about the goals as well as the means. So from the Western economic model, the growth has now become an end in itself, i.e. it's just perpetual growth as opposed to being a means towards something else. So what is the end goal of an Islamic economy? And also the notion of growth being in contradiction with sustainability. As sustainability was mentioned in the conclusion of both presentations, how can we really attain sustainability given growth involves actually increasing production, increasing consumption, which may go against Islamic values of moderation and balance, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Who was it? Me?
Yes. No, you did not raise your hand?
I did, but Doctor, please.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I just want to raise 2 points. The first one, starting with you, Doctor, when you said that we don't have an international relations theory. Actually, we have. We have been working on it since the 80s in the IIIT, and then later on in the Al-Umma fi Qarn, Al-Umma fi Aam reports that have coming out from the Hadara Center in Cairo. So I can claim with pride that we have something called the Cairo School, similar to the Frankfurt School, but we do not promote it. I mean, you are aware of that work, you know Dr. Nadia Mustafa's work and the group, etc. But when you yourself and other colleagues teach, you just go and teach the textbooks. So unless you hammer it, unless you insist on teaching it, and when you go to international conferences, you mention it, and people become interested, and we are forced then to translate. The problem is most of the work, I'm not an IR person, but I've been cooperating with them, most of it is in Arabic. So it's not accessible, but it's there, it has been there for 30 years, and it has been developing. We have something like 15 masters and PhD students who have been working on developing an approach to IR, and we are in the process of summarizing their theses and translating them. Because I was hammering Ibn Khaldun and his theories in everywhere I went in political theory conferences and globalization conferences, I'm proud to say that one of my mentors at LSE started teaching Ibn Khaldun in her course on seeing the world and globalizing the world, etc., as part of the tradition of humanity. So unless we push it, nobody will actually recognize it. The second question would be, I would address it to Professor Asma, I want to ask, what is our aspiration? Going back to the note of we want to desecularize the Muslim mind. When I ask, how can we improve the situation of women in the Muslim world? Should we actually try to improve it according to the Western way of thinking? Should I accept the fact that women, when they work in the market, this is my aspiration of equality and empowerment? Because going back to Fukuyama, he has a very interesting book that was not as famous as his End of History. It's titled The Great Disruption. And he was talking about how the work of women, and I'm a working woman, I'm not against women working, but how to position it, how to situate it in a paradigm, in a model that is actually fostering also the notion of the family, trying to establish the notion of compassion in community, being aware of the challenges of modernization and post-modernity. So I'm just worried a bit that we want to Islamize some of the indicators of women empowerment, and I'm just asking you to explain a bit what you think about it.
Thank you. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. I want to advise the argument of Mr. Al-Fattah Al-Awaisi when he spoke about the international relation theory, and there is no international relation theory. And I need to spoke with Mr. Ömer Çaha about the role of women in international relation. For example, I'm a student in political science and international relation, but sorry, this year the department is changed to political science department because there is no international relation in my department, and the international relation is still like elective course. So, like I am individual, woman. I want to be a professor in IR in the future, inshallah. So how can I be a professor in IR and there is no IR in our department? And you say that you need to women be great. So if you need to women be great and Isu be great with the international relation, like an like not elective course. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Sarah is one of our students here at the university, and she's from Tunisia. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. I also like this opportunity also to tell this to your rector at the right time. Also.
From a long time, I didn't buy it,
so let me start with the first question. Thank you very much, actually, because I guess I somewhat concerned about how this first two presentations, my presentation and Mehmet Bulut's presentation, has been understood. I don't think that there is any contradiction because of your points, because Mehmet Bulut has mentioned mostly the growth side, and my topic is about the development side. So I stated the current state of the Muslim countries from the development indicators, and unfortunately there, we are not that good. So unfortunately, I didn't have much time to talk about the more optimistic side, about Islamic finance, about the halal market, about the national visions. But when we look at the development figures, from the great divergence, still we are in that the great divergence stage, unfortunately. Even though we grow much faster, because this is what the economic theory is telling us, if you are relatively poor, relatively not rich, then you grow much faster. But the important thing is whether we are going to be converging to developed countries, whether we are going to have much higher level of growth. For that, sustainability is important. And as you mentioned, the distinction between growth and development is important, so I wanted to pose more development indicators. And in that development indicators, many things are included. And it is also related with your question that what do we understand by the development? For the development, first, growth has to be sustainable. And growth is not just about, growth is just about the GNP per capita growth or GDP figures, but development includes many things, like the labor force participation, like the women participation in politics, many things that you can think of. And more important, also the sustainability of those. I mean, you might be good at one point of time, but what is important is not to face with the crisis. In order, you have to sustain all those things. And that's why in there we have a lot to go, for sure. With regard to your question about what we understand from development in Islam, definitely the worldview will bring different dimensions to development. But what is nice about this Islamicity index is that most of the sub-indicators, unfortunately I couldn't have the time to show all the sub-indicators, but any human being would like to reach those sort of targets, whether we are Muslim or not. I mean, when we think about the development, Islamic development and so on, most of the Islamic development indicators will be similar to the regular development indicators, because all the humanity would like to reach certain basics for development. I mean, you might be, you don't want to be Muslim and, definitely it is self-perception and self-identity of to be a Muslim. But what is also important that we want all the Muslims to be richer, right? I mean, we want all the Muslims to have better governance in their states and so on. These are good things, and I don't think that we have to think, or let's say that Islamicity index actually is emphasizing that. I mean, it is not just about the discourse, but when we really follow the Islam, when we really abide with the rules, we have to come up with this development indicators. And unfortunately, we are not there. That was the point. But again, I mean, I don't think that there is a contradiction. When we look at the growth figures, for sure, the East is converging. East has much higher growth rates. But one probably comment on Professor Mehmet Bulut's part, when we think about East, are we really at the East? For example, there are many papers looking at this divergence, convergence issues from the economic perspective. For example, I like the studies by Danny Koa. Danny Koa shows the center of the world by the growth indicators. And the center of the world, I attended one of his speeches about 4 years ago, and it was passing through Istanbul, passing through Izmir, which is my hometown. So that's why I like that part. The idea is that with the economic indicators, when we determine one center of the world, right now it is in Turkey, and it is going towards the east. But is it a good thing for the Muslim world? We have to rethink about it, because when we think about the east is just China and India, and the neighboring countries will benefit more from this growth. And that's why, I mean, if the I'm not sure whether all the Middle Eastern countries, the Northern African countries, the Muslim countries will benefit from the rise of the East. I am not that sure about it, because only Malaysia, Indonesia is there, and inshallah this Silk Road and others will help. But always the rise of the China, and for example yesterday a professor from Penn State mentioned that China is probably looking for an enemy, and then Islamophobia is also rising there. So any sort of rise of the China, like with Chinese revisionism and so on, this sort of legitimization may not work for the Muslim world.
Thank you, Professor Ahmed. Professor Bulut.
Thank you for student question. Our department name is still Political Science and International Relations. Don't worry about that. Maybe the elective courses can be, you know, it depends on the chair, but maybe he will give you more answer on that. It is the same. We didn't change. So let's come to the Islamic economic development and growth. As we need a new paradigm, I tried to stress that according to Islam, you know, as Muslims in this world, we are living, and then there is hisab. There is an exam for us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the God says, don't come in front of me with two things. وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. Don't die without being a Muslim. Don't come in front of me with shirk or kufr, you know. This is the most important for a human being or for a Muslim to be, you know, in that exam. We have to be very careful about this. Is about Aqidah. Then Mu'amalat is coming after Aqidah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't come in front of me with any rights of any creation. Not just any human being, but any creation. Don't come in front of me in that exam, in that day, in the day of judgment, with any rights of creation. Not just human being, also belongs to, you know, animals. So, in our economic growth model, in our economic development theory, this is the base. So, it starts, you know, from the production process. You have to be respect to the producers as, you know, laborers. You have to be careful about your capital, from where you are getting it, and how you are using it. If it creates any rights, if you are collecting any rights of the people like interest machine, it doesn't allow, you know. So that means we have law and ethics. We have to follow these two things. Law, the rights of human beings and the other creations, and we, you know, the last messenger says, I came for, you know, the finishing or the, you know, the ahsan al-khuluq, to combine all the prophets, you know, the message is the same, but he said, I came for, you know, to combine all the ahsan al-khuluq, the best ethics. So, in a Muslim paradigm, of course, the base is the law. Our relations, in economic relations, law, that means kanun in our heritage. It's the base, but you know, according to Muhammad Ghazali, he says, law is starting in the bottom of the akhlaq. Did you understand what I mean? Law is, you know, 10% in our civilization, or 20%. Most problems can be solved by ethics, by akhlaq, you know. So it starts, you know, from the production process, and then when the goods came to the market, what happened in Medina? You know, the Prophet Muhammad came to Medina, and he found a market. There was a market, but you know, he didn't accept it. Why? Because the buyers were cutting the rows of the sellers, you know, the merchants, and they bought the commodities and then sell, you know, in the market. So, and you know, the market economy is the base in Islam. So there was a kind of monopoly, you know, a monopolistic attitude. This was a kind of monopolistic attitude. What's happening today, I am finishing, but it's very critical to understand what we are talking about. What is Islamic economics? It's not just finance. And Islamic finance without Islamic economics paradise doesn't matter. It is nothing. We have to understand the, you know, the whole paradigm. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, he found a market, but he prepared a new market. And what's happened today? Today, there is, you know, there are regulations in the market for the government, for the merchants, for the businessmen, but then the money, the capital is playing its role. They are changing the rules for the capitalists, you know, for the main actors of this economy. Let me give you an example in the recent crisis of the United States, you know, in 2008. What happened? There is a market economy, and you know, the most acceptable market economy is now in the United States, rather than, you know, in Rwanda or Turkey. So what happened? Some firms, you know, they lose the money, and they face with the crisis, and you know, so many firms in financial sector had to, you know, finish their business. And then what happened? The Treasury of United States, this was explained by a senator in the Senate. The Treasury of United States give money to some firms, to some businessmen, more than the GDP of United States in 2008. More than GDP. The GDP at that time was about 15 billion US dollar. More than this money they gave as a loan, you know. But for some others, what happened? Like some Muslim businessmen, they lost their money in United States. So the game is not, you know, ruling for the day of the judgment. This game was established by the, you know, establishing of modern capitalist system. In modern capitalist system, this system is working just for this world, not for the day of the judgment. But the Muslims are living for that day. There is limited time for us in this world. You know, we will know there is no limitation. We are, you know, aiming to reach to paradise. This is just, you know, so the critical issue is the rights of human beings and other creation in Islamic economics. All regulations, all the game must be established for that. So there are some other things, but the time is Not enough.
Thank you. I think what Professor Bulut is saying, we need a new paradigm. We need Muslim scholars to work to produce a new paradigm. This is basically what he is trying to summarize. Professor Ömer.
Just a couple of words. Thank you very much. It is very related with my issue I presented here. Actually, thank you very much for giving me a chance to make an announcement here. On Monday, coming Monday, we will have a departmental meeting, tea and talk, and we invite all classes, you know, including the prep school. We will have tea and talk, and we'll talk about departmental issues here in this room. For now, actually, that is not correct. You know, we prepared, we established a commission, and the commission has a very fundamental revision on our program, and there is a balance between political science and international relations. So there is no problem. Actually, we'll go to, you know, present more detail on the meeting. Okay, thank you very much.
Professor Asma.
If I understand.
No, the other one.
Or that one? Yes. Oh, okay. I want to make sure I understood your question correctly. My understanding is that you're asking why is it necessary to create a dichotomy between secular and Islamic values? Is that what you were saying?
The same path of empowerment, but from an Islamic perspective, to fall in that same trap. Like you mentioned, for example, women need to have services in the like kindergarten for free or whatever to empower them to be able to work and combine family and so should we do it this way, the way that the state is asking us to do it in other places and in other economies, or should we reconstruct the society and neighborhood in a way that would enable women to work but at the same time look after their families? I mean, the way of thinking about the tools of empowerment and how to save time and support women who are working should not be part of the wider sort of shift towards secular capitalism.
Yeah, but I would say it's not one or the other. I think it has to be a multi-pronged effort. It has to be the society, it has to be the state, and it has to be a question about honoring women's choices, whatever choices they make, that they feel are crucial to their flourishing as human beings. I don't see how you can separate one from the other. The society actually cannot implement legislation, for example, without the state's involvement in it. And legislation, reformed legislation, is not going to happen without the participation of the members of the society. So I just see it as a multi-pronged effort in which everyone has to be involved. And it shouldn't be just women fighting for their rights. It should be men and women fighting for their rights. And when I refer to Muslim feminists, I'm not also restricting it just to women. There are plenty of men who are working alongside women as well, because they understand these to be human rights that empower all of society, and they're fundamentally Islamic values. I just don't see a dissonance or a disjunction between women's rights as we envision them today in any way being contrary to fundamental conceptions of fundamental human rights within the Islamic tradition, which is why I think it's important to start from the early period to show that these are indigenous notions and that we can extricate these values from within the very diverse Islamic tradition.
Thank you. I just have one comment to Dr. Hiba, because from my own experience, when I write in Arabic, different from writing in English. The whole process of thinking when I'm writing in Arabic is totally different when I'm writing in English. So yes, in Cairo, in the 80s, there was a good work has been done, but still is addressing a local audience which can read this issue. And maybe the good example, there is so many scholars in the Arab countries wrote criticizing Orientalism. And no one get through international until Edward Said came. And I can name a lot of people who came about Orientalism before Edward Said, and no one noticed them internationally. But when Edward Said came, as part of the Western academia, and that's very important, I'm talking about, I have been 35 years in British academia. When you become familiar with the British academia and you start writing about Orientalism, you make an impact. This is where Edward Said's book become an authority, not in political science, but even in languages and business administration. There is a lot of questions this session and the rest of the conference raised, but I'm very glad to be with these scholars, but unfortunately time is running, and we have unfortunately to give it back to the chairman to the chair. Being gender or politically correct, give it to the chair of the conference to conclude this session.
Thank you so much for a very enlightening, very rich discussion on socioeconomic and social issues, especially on the empowerment of women as well as the development and growth. This session actually raised a lot of questions in my mind than answers, and these are the type of topics that you will be researching in the center, and hopefully all of them will be involved with us to enrich also the intellectual pursuit of these topics. In the conclusion, I would like to give each one of you an appreciation from the center, which is a plate with our logo. Let's see who is first. Dr. Ömer Çaha. Dr. Asma. Dr. Al-Fattah. Thank you. Dr. Aysan. Thank you. We now have a break until noon. After that, we will have our last session, which will be a very important, and it's going to cover lots of topics: the challenge of sectarianism, the challenge of secularism, the challenge of nationalism, and civilian-military relations. So I hope to have everybody back here at noon.
Just 1 minute.
Oh,
please. There is Professor Ahmet from Istanbul University. He would like to say something just in 1 minute, and then we will leave.
I am president the Economics History Research Center of Istanbul University. I am glad to give to Professor Bulut, president.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
For your especially economics history research from Ottoman to present.
Thank you so much. This is a great, event for me. He is the president of Istanbul Economic History Department. The establisher, the first economic historian, was Professor Ömer Lütfi Barkan, and he is now his follower. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure for me.
1930.
At 1930s. Thank you. Thank you so much.